Morning, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome Joni Wickline. Joni, welcome.
Hi, Sugata. Great to be here.
So I'd love to have you take a minute and introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah. So my name's Joni Wickline. I have been consulting for a couple decades plus with organizations, supporting them to improve performance and engagement of their employees. And much of my career has been in enablement for both indirect and direct sales channels. So for the last 6 months, I've been working with best-selling author and thought leader in the area of leadership. His name is Simon Sinek. Not everybody knows him, but he's best known for his TED Talk that went viral, a little over 15 years ago. And his book is called Start With Why.
Yeah, and also you have run companies. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your background there. You ran partnerships.
Yeah.
Run companies.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'll let you kind of discuss.
So I have led professional services, but more importantly in this space, I have been Chief Channel Officer. More recently was with Leadership Circle, which is a high-end 360 leadership assessment. And then prior to that, Blanchard. And Blanchard is known also in the leadership development space. And I ran a number of global positions, with most of them touching sales enablement, sales and delivery enablement for the indirect channel partners. At Blanchard, we call them strategic partners because these partners were representing countries. And one of the gaps that I saw in my role was sales enablement. So many organizations focus on delivery, and sales enablement was kind of a second thought. And so in the last 15 years, I really have been focusing on sales enablement for the indirect sales channel in the companies that I've worked with.
That's fantastic. So can you tell us a little bit about the education segment? Like, how is it structured? Because you've worked in that space quite a bit, and I think it'll be great to know.
Sure. So the educational sector is huge. For example, at Blanchard is a global leadership development company. And really, Blanchard launched as off the heels of Ken Blanchard, who wrote a bestseller many decades ago called The 1 Minute Manager. But the business really grew from individual public workshop type things to large global enterprises. And in order for a company like Blanchard to support multinationals, they looked growing through strategic partners around the world. And so what was the way they served customers was through partnerships. And these partnerships were smaller training companies that could serve them on a global scale. When Blanchard launched their international business, again, it took a little bit of time because they needed to find partners that would support them. And
in the competitive front, who were the main players? Like in corporate, enablement, that's a pretty big segment now, but it wasn't, a couple of decades ago. So who were the players at that period of time?
Yeah, so back in the day, there were 3 to 4 large players: CDI, Zinger-Folkman, Center for Creative Leadership, and now it's grown. Korn Ferry has stepped into the business, many learning providers, and other type platforms that are bringing tons of content into their platform from other learning providers. So the business has changed. It's gotten more competitive. And what's required now is for Blanchard-like companies to really look at how they support their partners, the sales enablement piece, because it's through the partners that their business and impact will grow.
So, one of the main area we spend a lot of time with thinking about is workflow automation, right? And one of the goals for workflow automation is to make companies more efficient in what they do internally and as well as externally with their partners. Now, as a part of that, what happens is, skills get bundled and automated. It has been happening for a while, right? I mean, if you look at the US economy, it's 30 trillion today. It was at a fraction 20 years ago. And it was predominantly driven by technology. So the skills that were required 20 years ago, a lot of it are not relevant anymore. So corporate America, very, very likely, not just corporate America, but corporations worldwide are really now focused on employee skill building, because the skills that they bring into the company 3, 4, 5 years down the road, they become obsolete, right?
Yeah.
From your perspective, how do these companies go to market to these, whether large or mid-size organizations, kind of, who are their buyers, who are their customers, how do they pitch to them? Do they go after individual employees, or do they go through HR? Do they go to the functional heads? How do they approach from a value prop perspective?
Yeah. So typical approach has in the past been HR. And now again, organizations have gotten more sophisticated. They've got people officers. And but it hasn't changed much. What has changed is the decision making. So in the past, management development was also, even though it's a soft skill, it was considered critical. Nowadays, the critical skills are resilience and communication and innovation and collaboration. And it makes it so much harder because there are so many variables in these soft skills that an organization that you're selling to is looking for. So in terms of selling to organizations, you really need to uncover what their need is, where it's coming from, what are the outcomes, and most importantly, what are the metrics? What are they looking to gain, or what are some of the pains they need to overcome? And again, it's soft skills. So it's making it even more difficult in today's age to sell these skills, even though organizations know that this is going to be the game changer, because we can't measure the return on investment. We can measure it, but it's much harder. So organizations are really looking for these learning providers to be their partner. And again, so many variables into how to sell to these, because their needs and outcomes are different. It's not like in the tech business where they are specifically all kind of looking at a tech provider for to serve the same kind of needs and outcomes.
So that's quite fascinating what you just said. You said a couple of decades ago, management was about efficiency, or even individual productivity was tied to efficiency, and the coaching was around that. And today you're saying it's around resilience, it's around communication. Those are fundamentally EQ driven thing than just IQ and muscle driven things. So can you tell us a little bit, like, what happened, how it shifted, and where are we going from here, from individual productivity and organizational productivity wise?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting what happened and how did it shift? Technology. AI, just 3 years ago, the CEO of the company I was working for was saying, we need to understand AI. We need to understand how we need to use it. And now today, organizations not only are using it, they understand it. And I think it's becoming more and more part of the fabric of how they're serving their customers and how they're supporting their internal teams. So what's changed is really how we sell to organizations from a learning provider standpoint. And again, the difficulty is each one of these organizations we're selling to have different needs and outcomes. And so attaching specific training to that is really an art. It's not a science. And so it's what we have to do in this world and in this business is to support organizations with the skills that are going to drive the outcomes and the metrics that they're looking for, whether it's, solving a pain point or helping them to gain some access to other business opportunities.
So let's go back to this, because I want to stay on this for a little bit. So if you think about 20 years ago, the whole concept of, Blanchard, 1 Minute Manager, read the book, loved it. The essential thesis of it, even though there were elements of EQ in there, but it was relatively mechanical and you can implement to your life. And if I draw an analogy to my own experience, for my entire life, I really never properly ate or exercised because I was always on a plane. But one thing I did do is learn how to meditate. But even 30 years later, I cannot do it more than 15 minutes. I can't stay focused. But I got a trainer on strength training, last 5 years. And it was amazing how quickly I changed and adapted. So when it comes to these tactical muscle memory related stuff, we tend to do much faster and better and see the change. But when it comes to the emotional side, it takes forever. So if you're saying we have moved from this mechanical functional piece to a lot more emotional, dimensions of human behavior, how do you, what is that you teach? How do you make these leaders understand how important it is in this age of AI? How do employees embrace and they even start and stay the course, because it's much harder?
Yeah. I'm glad you raised that. And that's one of the things that, I'm learning with Simon Sinek, and his value proposition is that the way you engage leaders and team members is it starts from the inside out. So just like habits and new behaviors, there needs to be a compelling reason, right, to embrace learning and stretching those new muscles to change your behavior, because behavior change takes time and it's hard. And a good example of that is what's happened in the last 15 years, even the last 10 years. Coaching, one-on-one coaching in organization has become mainstream. Back in the day, in the early 2000s, when Scott Blanchard started coaching.com, it was new. And we were going out and talking to organizations about coaching, and they were like, well, what is that? That's just for people that are problem child. They need support. They're on a developmental path that doesn't look good. So let's hire them a coach. Now it's mainstream. And so the same goes for what AI is doing to organizations. It's really leaning on the people to communicate better, to have that emotional intelligence, to build relationships. And that's where, again, it's a new for learning providers.
So I watched a podcast and someone was talking about how to use these, AI assistant, and the debate was about, can AI have emotional intelligence? And the discussion centered around the user can tone down their messages in a proper way using AI. So while they would have sent an angry email, but if they put it to an AI filter, it cleans it up. And, so there is an element of that coaching that's happening on the communication side. Do you see AI stepping up any form or shape into broader than just cleaning up an email and then toning it down?
Absolutely. I actually saw a platform not too long ago that took content like Ken Blanchard content, that framework, the situational leadership, and could put it into an AI coaching just-in-time personal coach. I was going to say bot, but it's really not a bot. And it was amazing how, as a manager, I could put in, I'm having difficulty talking through giving feedback to this one individual, and here's the situation. It came back with using the framework of situational leadership. Here's how you might approach it. And it was incredible. And so if that's happening right now, I think it's only going to increase. So AI is having a big impact on learning and development. And as a individual, I certainly want access to my coach. And if my coach can be somebody that's not a person that I have to schedule with, even the better, right?
See, if you think about like human, evolution, like going back to all the way to Mesopotamia and then Egypt and evolution of, writing and papyrus, and the form of education really hasn't changed that much. That when you grow up, because your mom and dad at work, therefore you go to a school, 8 to 4 or whatever the schedule is, you go to classes, and the only thing they teach you is rinse and repeat, and then you get books and you get assignments, and
Yeah.
and you memorize, and you kind of throw up at an exam, and based on how well you memorize, you get scores, right?
Right,
So,
right.
and that's the game we've been teaching our kids. I mean, I personally went through the same one, but now you shift to this paradigm where they don't teach you resilience. They don't necessarily teach it. They may teach you writing, but they don't teach you communication in complex environment, right? The
No.
other elements that you're talking about. So if you look at the next 5 years, the workforce that's coming in or the workforce that's at play have been trained the old way. So how do they upskill them, in this new age of AI and be ready for the next frontier?
Okay, that's the other big shift that's changed. So, in the past, learning providers would do training workshops. They would be 2 to 3 days long, and it would be one and done. And what's happened even in the last decade, and it's even becoming more prevalent each day this year, I'm even noticing, is that just in time, just enough small little bits information to or training and learning is what this new generation wants. And so they don't want to sit in a classroom. They good with having like a 15-minute video about giving feedback, and then maybe some snippets and prompts, coaching throughout the week where they can apply it. So training is become, for training learning providers, it's become harder. They have to be more innovative in the way they go about transferring knowledge. And I have to say, it's not about transferring knowledge. It's about creating new behaviors. And that's hard. As you shared, Sugata, meditation, you could only do it for 15 minutes. That's a new behavior. That's a new muscle. And giving feedback, doing something that's hard requires more than a skill building session in a classroom. It requires ongoing focus and stretching and on the job application. So it's very different.
Over the last decade, we've been hearing this phrase called lifelong learning, right? It wasn't the case before because, like, at least when I got hired first at Honeywell, you kind of expected that you're going to work at that company forever. And I
Yeah.
did work there for a long time, for 10 years. And then, progressively, number of years people have worked at a specific companies have dropped substantially because of more opportunities and the job change and etc. So when you think about lifelong learning today, really means something that is for real. But do you see, my kid was a big fan of Pokemon Go, right? And one of the thing was funny about that is it's not that they played games, but they also learned a lot of things through that interactive experience, right? And it changed behaviors. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you think about, as we know, the way education is, which is printed in a book, write down on a pen and paper, maybe you type on a computer, because then you're building a different muscle versus the age that you're talking about. Are we talking about constantly interacting with a coach that my neuron gets rewired one at a time? Because I have to change my behavior. That's your message.
Yeah. 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 I think it's the latter of what you just shared. It's changing, it's doing 1% better every day or every week, so that when you get to the end of the month, it's like, oh, wow, I've got a new muscle that I've just, I can look back and say I've really grown. But it's little snips of activity, not necessarily coaching, but on the job learning, practicing what you've learned from a training session or from some video that you watched. You really need to have the opportunity to use it you really need to have the opportunity to use it on the job for it to become real.
So let's come to sales enablement, right? That has been a core area we spend a lot of time. And if you think about, selling before when I say before, maybe 20 years ago, and even 10 years ago before COVID, it was very, very relationship centric. If you're selling into enterprise, you would fly, you will do demos, you'll collect cards, you'll see the body language of the team that's purchasing $100,000 or $300,000 solution.
Yep.
And they will come back and you follow up with the key decision maker, and we followed Miller Hyman and spin selling and, all those kind of principles. Today, people are selling $1 million systems just based behind the computer, like the way we are today, right?
Yeah.
So there is no emotional connectivity. So there are other things that are coming up like multi-threading and etc. But what is happening to sales enablement when it comes to like, what did people were taught before and what should they be taught now, kind of looking forward next 3 to 5 year horizon?
Yeah, what they need to be taught now is to speak the customer's language, and which is hard because you really need to be good at asking questions to understand their pain points, to understand, what are some opportunities that they're really looking to go after. And as a salesperson, then you need to take those pains and gains and put it into an offering with your solution that has evidence that it's really going to help that organization increase such and such or alleviate some of the pain points that are getting in the way of their success. So there's just so many variables in this kind of education space that makes it so much harder for a salesperson to hit the mark with their prospect. So from a sales enablement standpoint, I'd say that, again, what I'm focused on helping organizations do is to really lead productive discovery calls to uncover what are the organizational needs, what are their outcomes, and then what are the metrics that they're hoping to move the needle on. And again, it's more of an art, but from a scientific standpoint, I can put structures in place to have a discovery conversation, to feedback what you heard, and then to partner with them to together create a solution that the customer is going to buy.
As when we go back like about 20 years ago, one of the main thing was buyers came in looking into the whole sales process as an education process, right? Because they kind of didn't know. Today, it's the opposite. The numbers we're seeing, whether it's Gartner for IDC or Forrester, they're saying, 70, 80% of the buyers, they educate themselves online. They know what they're buying. They're coming in with a very specific thing in mind. Mm-hmm. So in that space, if I bring in your previous point about sort of emotional intelligence, like what is expected of a salesperson behavior-wise to have today that they didn't have or they didn't have to worry about before?
That's such a good point. You have to meet the buyer where they're at. So in that kind of scenario, these salespeople need to be flexible. So if the buyer is coming in saying, look, we know we need communication, we need this resilience training, and here's why, that's great. What you need to do then as a salesperson is, again, partner with them to identify what they see as the solution so that you can, again, make that sale. But it just goes to show that there's not a prescriptive path that in terms of sales enablement a salesperson must do, but there are tools and resources for them to be more successful. So if the discovery process, for example, has already been done with the client, then the salesperson then needs to work with them on the solution. And that needs to be very collaborative in order for them to want to partner with you. It's all about building trust in that relationship that I'm not being sold to. I have a partner that is interested and sees that I have a prospect that sees that my interest is in serving them, in partnering with them to deliver what it is they need.
So going back to, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, as you know, I follow him quite a bit, and he talks about how leadership can be taught, and you can change yourself, as you said, 1% every week, and eventually, make huge progress. I want to comment on the sales side, behavior wise. So sales has been, predominantly on large enterprise deals, outside relationship centric, taking the client out to dinner, taking the client golfing, to sell based on some form of emotional trust. Today, we are in this transactional video conference mode where the relationship literally ends after 60 minutes and you to the next step of the funnel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So going back to this notion of trust, which behaviorally we're cued to connect when you're in person very differently than when you're online. This notion of warmth or funny or approachable or trust, these other soft elements. So today, do the extroverts have more advantages over the introverts, or it's the other way around, or can you change behavior? What behavior, these sales folks need to learn to be trustworthy through the process so they don't come across they're trying to sell something?
Yeah, I don't believe that it's introvert versus extrovert. I mean, a lot of people would say extroverts win all the time. That's not true. I believe you need to match in the person sitting on the other side of your video camera or across the desk. You need to match their style. But from a sales standpoint, prospecting, earning trust, you need to give your customers, your prospects, something that supports them in achieving their goals. And so it's not about reaching out and checking in on the sale. It's more about reaching out and saying, hey, I just saw this article that, based on what we talked about last week, gosh, this really summarizes and speaks to what we talked about. I thought you might find this interesting. So it really is about building a relationship that shows that you care, that shows that you want to do whatever it takes to support them professionally, their role. It's not just about anymore. It's about creating trust. And you do that by giving them resources that's going to support them professionally that might not be related at all to your product or service.
So what I'm hearing from you, which is like, the notion of which used to be called corporate training, and then it moved into organizational learning. And then what I'm hearing from you is that it's evolving into more of an organizational transformation, because when you sold the book, you sold an input, and now you're talking about changing outcomes through behavior, which is very, very output driven. So therefore, the great news is the market is much bigger, right? Because it's massive change that's coming. So are these educational organizations ready for this change? I mean, do they understand that they have moved from selling a book to selling transformation?
I think so. And the reason I think that, Sugata, is that most of these organizations have added coaching. And the reason they've added coaching is that one-on-one coaching or even group coaching really helps with the behavioral change. So, and behavioral change individually means that changes can happen on teams and in organizations. So I do believe that learning providers have become just as sophisticated in helping organizations to transform.
So when you think about, selling like an outcome-based solution, the market is significantly larger. It is great to hear the providers of this knowledge have changed and evolving. Let's talk about partnership from a go-to-market perspective, right? Because it'll be a pervasive need across every language, every country, because AI is not just going to stop at the border of US, right? It is everywhere. So how do these knowledge provider or change provider take their, let's say, methodologies of transformation, right? Not just the book, and the coaches, and whether they're the partners or not, you can define. How do they go to market in this new age? How does the AI agents fit into that equation? And how do you take the knowledge from English to 150, 190, 200 languages?
Yeah, well, that is absolutely a big pain point for learning providers. and the language barrier. Not just the language barrier, but also the cultural barrier. So how does your learning approach or framework translate from North American culture to Latin American culture and so forth? And the way that these learning providers are doing it, thus why I've reached out to you in my past couple roles, is they're doing it through some strategic partnerships in those countries. And what they are very good at is the delivery enablement, teaching them the framework and giving them those resources to either translate and deliver to their customers. What they're not good at, and they don't spend as much time on, is the sales enablement piece. And part of the reason is I believe they just have not had the platform to really be thoughtful and robust and to make it easy for that partner to go out and position and sell to their prospects.
I personally went through massive transformation. When I look at my sort of 3 decades in tech, possibly the most profound phase was in the 90s when we went through these total quality circle changes. Because first, as a young engineer, it was kind of traumatic to see so many people leaving the organization because of process engineering. Mm-hmm. Later on, I think things became incremental and absorption of technology was very, very incremental. You got a faster computer, you got another application. Right. Your workflow didn't fundamentally change, right? And right. As a manager, you went through emotional intelligence coaching and you started to address those dimensions, right? Mm-hmm. Today, like where we are, what I'm hearing from you, there are like 2 sets of changes are happening. One is the skills are changing because agents are coming in. Mm-hmm. And the requirements at a human level are much higher because you need to have resilience, you need to have communication skills, you have to have cultural awareness. You just can't take one frame. Mm-hmm. So it must be a huge opportunity for these educational organizations to tap into this because it's a massive amount of change, and change means opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It is a massive opportunity. And it's why, again, I'm seeing learning providers want to go global and they will bring on a partner, but then they don't do the work necessarily to help enable them to do the selling and the marketing. And so they don't get the return. And then that's the domino effect. I'm not going to do it then. It's too much work. And again, I see this as a huge opportunity because the solution, they know the impact they're having in their direct sales, taking that and giving those resources and tools, that decade of delivering and selling to a partner is so hard. As I shared with you in an earlier email, one of my mentors is David Covey, of the late Stephen Covey. And he said, the return's not there. I need to help them sell and get their first client. But what I get is not much for a return. And so I want to do as little as possible in order to get that return. And again, that sounds really harsh. But over time, you've got these, I know that I can make a bigger impact by working with these partners, but it just takes too much time to help them.
One of the books I really love is Michael Gerber, E-Myth. And Michael Gerber's E-Myth, where it's a book, came out about 20, maybe even longer, 25 years ago. And what he talks about is that entrepreneurs need to have, a technical side, a sales side, and a managerial side, and also a financial side, right? Mm-hmm. So when you think about a coach, their fundamental skill sets, it's coaching. They're not marketing people, they're not salespeople, possibly they're not even financial people. Yeah. And we have seen similarity of that when you think about in hardcore computer networking space, we will have a brilliant engineer who started a business, but they're kind of a high-tech pipe fitter. And they're not marketing and salespeople. So companies like Cisco's and IBM's and HP's, they spend enormous amount of dollars building infrastructure around their skill sets instead of trying to change them. augment them so they can be the greatest networking pipe fitter or
Yeah.
solution provider, but they brought in other engines, right? So what
Yeah.
I'm hearing from you, the opportunity is, instead of asking the coach to be a marketer and a sales and a FinOps and all these people, let them be coach. And these educational institutions need to bring in an infrastructure to augment who they are and then allow them to grow their business.
Absolutely. And I'm smiling a little bit, Sugata, because we found that at Blanchard. We would bring on these amazing partners who had passion and they were so good at the delivery side. And then we would give them a few marketing tools and leave them on their own. And they would not perform the way that we all had high hopes for. And so, yeah, it's a huge pain point for providers, but it's also a huge opportunity for them because these partners that are so good, like you said, pipe fitters, they're so good at the delivery side. What they need is an easy button for marketing and selling it. And that's the gap that I'm seeing with many is that piece. And it's why I'm also seeing sales enablement increase in this market.
And it's kind of a funny analogy. I mean, a networking person comes in and, rewires your business. And these coaches that really are that, they're just rewiring your brain. So they're kind of coming in and help you to get there step by step. So tell us a little bit about, what does the partnership network look like today for these organizational change providers?
Say that in a different way, Sugata.
Like, what do the partner networks look like today for these companies that have been traditionally sold books and courses and training? How does it look today?
How does it look today? Well, I think they are getting more sophisticated. They are putting together a learning management system for these partners. They know that the gap in sales enablement, marketing and sales is there. And so they are focused more on creating special resources and tools for their partners. But again, there's no easy button yet for learning providers to push out marketing and sales to their partners. But what they're also doing is they're bringing on account managers for their partners. So they might have an account manager for, say, Europe or maybe two, and they're focused solely on supporting that partner. And that's been, of course, moving the needle on gaining more impact and customers through their network.
So on the enablement side, when I think about the technology space, when you're bringing in a reseller of a router or switches or a server, you put them through some sort of a training and make sure they can go deploy that, right? How does it work when you bring on a coach? Because you actually bring in an individual with a certain training style or coaching style that may be different from the second person you're bringing on board, right? So if I am methods provider that driving sales enablement changes or behavioral changes through a bunch of coaches, is that a challenge, or do they have programs in place to put them through so that the service that comes out of it is unified?
Yeah, yes, it's a challenge. And as I was thinking about the role I played in my last, when I was Chief Channel Officer, leadership circle, we had many different types of what we would call channel partners. And so we needed to have different work streams or different resources and tools for each, different learning journeys. And again, we were, which is how I met you, we were looking at platforms so that we could do that. And in the absence of having a technology platform where a partner can do self-service in finding the resources and tools specific to their type of ideal client is hard to do without a system in place for you to give access to that partner, that channel partner.
So let's we're coming to an end. So I want to end with AI again. One of the reason people are excited in healthcare field is because we don't have enough doctors and we don't have enough nurses. So the hope is these AI agents would significantly reduce the paperwork that these two groups of people or even administration have to do and augment their knowledge at point of care, right? Um, and it seems like, the level of change that is about to happen or has been happening, there are not enough coaches. So do you think AI agents will augment that? Do you think, people are going to stay away from an AI agent because there's a stigma about AI? Like, what do you think the next 3 years will kind of look like when it comes to personal growth?
I think you've hit it. There is more and more coaches entering the market every day. More and more coach certifications coming on the market every day. Jay Shetty has a coach certification. Simon Sinek is launching his coach certification. So there are more coaches needed. And again, it's what helps with individual behavior change. So with AI, what I see doing is helping with the administrative work and hopefully giving more time to work on the human side, the human skills, the human connection, relationships. That's what I see happening in the industry. And I'm really excited about AI and what it means for business. And all the more reason, I think, that human skills, leadership development, all of those things are going to be even amplified more because there will be more time, and the next gen is expecting it. They want to work in a place where they feel valued, they're excited, and engagement in organizations comes from that relationship that you have with your manager. It's so important.
So let me kind of ask you kind of maybe a Star Trek moment, is that, do you think anytime soon that I'll have, my AirPods on and I'll have my iPhone with me and it's going to be listening to a conversation and Simon Sinek would be talking to my ears how to speak and respond in a very, emotionally complex situation? Do you think it's coming down the pike, or do you think it's not a reality?
Oh, I think it's coming. I think it's really close. When I was talking to a prospect representing Simon, Simon brings that intensity. It's his voice that gives inspiration and he inspires people, right? But then it's followed by consistency. So you can't listen to an hour or even 20 minutes of Simon, but what you can get are snippet videos and reminders of what's important. And I know for a fact that Simon is even talking about what that could look like and how to leverage technology today to serve individuals, again, to help them on their growth journey.
That is amazing. Joni, I got to have you back. There's so much. I had no idea how this space is transforming. Thank you for being here. You've been amazing. Would love to have you back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. This has been fun.